There's only 3 co-ops left in Victoria at the moment: Polo Bay, San Remo and Lakes Entrance.
It was sad times, but it was progression too, because boats disappeared out of the industry and was no need for them.
In the early 1900s, there would have been lots of uncertainty. I don't think it would have been an industry you would have wanted to be involved in. Down in a place like this, there would be heaps of fish, but you wouldn't be able to sell it.
The issues back in those days would be actually selling your products. We're a long way from nowhere, really, here in Apollo Bay.
The sanctity of distance here, to get your product to market, wasn't an easy thing. All your supplies are brought in by sea. It's the only way in and the only way out.
Back in the early days, the first piers built in Apollo Bay were actually at Point Bunbury, and they were servicing specifically the timber industry.
They needed timber for the gold mines, for the shafts. Consequently, we had 3 sawmills in Apollo Bay, going flat out.
So there's old maps, and you can actually see these tram tracks that crisscrossed their way through the Otways and actually came all the way down here to Point Bunbury. They would bring the logs and the timber down there. Even access to the land is quite tricky. You're susceptible to the vagaries of the government in terms of who's allowed to do what on which bit of land.
Well, the road was virtually impassable for most of the year. We've been narrow, rutted. I think it was a 2-day journey or 3-day journey to forest.
Whereas fishing, if you had your wherewithal about you, you could go up on the hill, chop down a bloody big tree, and that's the keel for your boat. The sea was there, it was available, you just had to get on it. If you could build a boat, you could go fishing.
And then when one sawmill closed down, it was a good thing that we had a fishing industry. And then when the other sawmill closed down, it was really good that we had a fishing industry.
The Great Ocean Road is actually a war memorial, and in fact it's the biggest war memorial in the world.
They would have had government grants all along the Victorian coast to get the young people working, because otherwise everyone was going to be without jobs and stuff after the war.
The government, in its wisdom, decided to carve a road out by pick and shovel, basically.
And of course, back in the day, they did have some machinery like steam shovels and things, but because it was so steep, none of that machinery could be used. So every piece of that Great Ocean Road had to be carved out by hand.
It was a goat track, pretty much. They would hammer and picks into solid rock, basically.
And it became the biggest monument of the returned soldiers that we've ever seen in Australia, I would imagine. You know, it was just incredible what these guys did.
The opening of the Great Ocean Road really changed Apollo Bay. So it started to just multiply out the opportunities. Apollo Bay became a real tourist destination because of it. But it also meant that it got more popular. There was more hospitality, guest houses, and of course, more people to eat fish. So the actual fishing industry grew at a local level, which it hadn't really done before. Over the years, they decided to build the Long Pier, which was the big one. That was the first public pier. By being a public pier, it meant that more people could use it, more shipping could use it, and people could promenade. How delightful. Most of the fish that they were after was barracuda, colloquially called cooter. And in those days, this is sort of back in the 1930s, if you went to a fish and chip shop in Melbourne and asked for fish and chips, the fish you got was cooter. So Apollo Bay provided a lot of cooter, and they would send it into Melbourne.
Before there was a co-op, you probably do a lot of it off your own back, you know. You put it in your back of your ute and drove it to Melbourne. So that meant days lost fishing the next day.
They didn't have refrigeration either. They would get the cooter off the boats onto the jetty. They'd quickly get them back to land. They would put them on trucks. They would try and get them up over the hill up to Forest to connect with a railway line that would take the produce into Melbourne.
Because in those days, it wasn't a 2 or 3 hour drive, it was probably a day's drive to get this stuff to Melbourne.
If it was too slow or it was too hot, by the time the fish got to Melbourne, it was going off.
All the other ports were in the same predicament. Their product was going on the back of a truck. Looking back at it now, I mean, it wouldn't pass the hygiene test, would it, when you think about it?
It was a sort of a dog-eat-dog thing. You know, if you were first in, your fish got sold first.
You know, if a fisherman asked another fisherman, how was the fishing at the Big Reef? And he says, oh, it's rubbish. It's like, quick, get the gear and get out to the Big Reef. You know, it's obviously running hot out there. Everyone keeps their cards very close to their chest. The end of World War II was a big change for a lot of industries.
After the Second World War, a lot of the men came back and a lot of them were damaged. And I think fishing gave them an escape. They could get away and probably contemplate a bit of what they'd been through and what they'd seen.
Bob Fisk and all those blokes had been to the Second World War, and the parents, I think, were, and they came home and they had to have a job. Their fathers had been fishing before, but nothing serious, and these boys needed work, so this is what happened. They went to work.
The fishing industry was really an industry of opportunity. Because of the easy access to the sea and the easy entry into the industry, it was a real opportunity for the fishing industry to grow. And so it could arguably be said that following World War II was really the early heydays of the fishing industry. There were a lot of people coming home, a lot of hungry people, and a lot of fish out there.
The government funded the co-ops in 1948, so they set one up in every little port from Portland through to Lakes Entrance.
There was a very strong driving force by people like Frank Barron, Jeff Sim, the Fisk family.
You look around a lot of the streets around town, Telfords, Fisks, Ramsdens, all fishing families.
There was a whole series of people absolutely devoted to the core, getting this place up and running, and it must have been really, really tough in the early days.
In our humble way, this was big infrastructure. The building of a harbour, the building of the co-op. But the co-op is situated where it is, not by accident. It's because it's at the back of the harbour.
Having the harbour here made it much more viable. I think once they started the harbour, the co-op got built.
It would have been a great improvement for the boys, though, to come from the jetty to live in here.
I think they talked about it before they did it, and the fishermen said, yeah, this is a good idea, let's do it.
I'd say it was just a bunch of people in a little shed on top of this hill and nowhere to go. That's probably how it started, I would imagine.
Boys needed work, and then naturally enough they needed facilities, mainly ice.
At that time, the government said, you know what, we will provide loans to all the fishermen's co-ops along the coast so they can build freezers. So when this co-op building was originally built, the locals colloquially called it the freezer. and everyone made use of it because no one had fridges in the homes.
Yeah, even when I first started, the supermarkets used to use ice creams and frozen food.
The fishermen were bringing the fish in this door, and the people from up the road were bringing in their rabbits and stuff, and they were hanging them in the freezer. Everyone used it. It was great.
Well, it was invaluable, the co-op. Some places where there's no co-op, of course, they've still got their own facilities, but power goes off, you lose everything you've got, whereas the co-op had a backup system like the gardener. You start the gardener up, you got electricity back through there, and your bait doesn't go off.
And what the co-op tried to alleviate is to take that competitiveness out of it. It gave the fishermen much more security.
The Apollo Bay Fishermen's Co-op, like all co-ops, is a cooperative. And what a cooperative is it's an organisation owned and run by its members, so in this case the fishermen, for the benefit of its members, the fishermen.
It was a team spirit, it was like a footy team going out to play. Basically, okay, you made some money, but you didn't make a hell of a lot. But it was sustainable. The people made a living out of it.
It made them as fishermen. It really made them.
These people, even when they've stopped fishing, they still come forward, and if there's a job that needs to be done, these guys get out of the woodwork and they just do it.
So to band together in a co-op and have one truck take all the fish at once, more time in the water, more money in the bank. Cooperation, there you go, in a word. The Fishermen's Cooperative stood for cooperation between the fishermen.
If you drive down the Great Ocean Road, every little village that you stop in, there was a co-op. So if you went to Port Campbell, Port Fairy, all these places, going back the other way, Lorne, Anglesey, every single village along the coast had a fisherman's co-op.
There was a lot of boats, a lot of camaraderie. It's one of the, best institutions ever because it had employment. Our local ladies used to do the books and all this sort of stuff. It's a great system.
The fishermen were a valued part of the town because when I first came, I think the fishing industry was probably the biggest employer in town.
The co-op's always been here in my lifetime. Coming into the industry as a teenager, it was an eye-opener. I remember hanging out up there as a kid. I used to come over and see my father unload trays and that. Learning from my father was good. Some days frustrating, but the majority of the time it was good.
I've always been very committed to a cooperative principle. Dad became the foreman manager when I was 15. During the school holidays, I was always working here and filleting barracuda by hand. The ocean sneaks up on you. I got to know the people like Bob Fisk and Roy Fisk, the two brothers. You lucky buggers, I'm going to be one of you guys. That's what I said to myself at the time. My first boat that I actually used when I was 17, I actually hired it from Ted Urquhart. Old Ted said to me, young fella, you take my boat and you go for it. And I did.
My dad got sick of flat country. We came up here, the whole family, and looked at the farms and bought a farm. One stage we had just over 1,000 acres between the whole family. The thing that made me look into fishing was those boats bobbing around nicely on the ocean. I was pushing all this dirt around and I was thinking, this is not the way to go. I've got to get on an ocean, and I did.
You're excited in a way because you're doing it, but you're also daunted by the responsibility that you've just taken on. You think you can do it, but can you actually do it?
On the boat there's Well, there is always only two of us on this boat. Working with my brother is frustrating sometimes, but most of the times it's enjoyable because we both have that same passion of catching a cray. Yeah, fishing with family's good because when you come home and have those family experiences, there's always someone there that can relate to it and knows that's how it happened, or will pull you up and tell you that's not what happened.
I think we see a lot of special moments, and you probably forget a lot of it because it's just there. Some of the days you put in at sea, you're thinking, Jesus, I shouldn't really be here, but it's quite spectacular being here. You went to work in the morning, you didn't know what was going to happen. Every day was different, even though what you did was mechanical. The conditions you work in every day would be different. You'd see things some days that you'd never see again, and you work in conditions that most people wouldn't feel comfortable in, but you just do it because that's what you do.
One of the best days fishing with my father, I remember, we were down at King Island. You couldn't have got a better day. It was glassy, calm. We'd shot the gear off and then we were just drifting around waiting for a day shot. And this big humpback whale popped up right next to us. I remember that day we were running up and down the deck of the boat from the bow to the stern watching this whale as it was circling us. If I had had a camera, I could have made a fortune. It was good. He was running up the deck as much as I was. He was just as intrigued. Apollo Bay is a location. It's a great spot. On a good day, it's great. And even on a rough day, I still appreciate it because I know the damage that it can cause. There's a lot of mateship amongst fishermen because as much as you're individuals, you're reliant on each other for your existence. If you're at sea and you break down or your boat's sinking, you want that person to come and save you and to be there for you.
Anywhere I go, I'm a retired fisherman. Always. That's just my life. That's what I love. Still do. We also, in those days, used to have Christmas parties. Fishermen would all come in and their families would all go to the co-op, put out a great spread for the kids. They'd all have a good time. That's how we sort of kept together as a community. It's a great spot, that co-op.
I think the co-op, for me, is an icon of opportunity. I fell in love with the co-op the first time I saw it. I mean, it is just steeped with tradition and history and these amazing characters, the people that are part of it. I've often said to people it's like walking onto a movie set. The place itself has a personality and it's full of amazing personalities.
The co-op's still standing and going well because of the fishermen. The co-op as a community thing at the moment is probably the best thing for the fishermen anyway.
When they first built it, they had working bees to build it. When there was decisions to be made about how the direction the future went, the fishermen together made the decisions.
We're really fortunate here. There's been a core group of people, original fishing families, who have kept that dream alive to this day.
It's passed down the line of people doing what they do.
3 of my deckhands became skippers. I generally keep my deckhands 9 years, 10 years. Some have about 5 a year.
It's just the small things that you wouldn't know if you were just starting out today. It takes a long time to learn how to fish properly.
Trevor, he worked for me for 9.5 years. He's a good boy, and he's run his own system now and been ever there since in the bay.
Gerard helped set me up in ways that, I fished for him for a lot of years, so I knew some places to go. And when Gerard retired, it was a very strange time for me and for him. It was time to give it away, and it was time for me to step up. Good times, but sad times too. Lessons been learnt for us younger fishermen through the older generations, no doubt about it.
There's a shift now towards tourism, and we've become a tourism town, and hospitality is really important.
People are just intrigued to see you unload crays or scale fish. You feel like a movie star.
What we can offer in Apollo Bay, and especially through the harbour and the co-op, is a unique experience. People can come here and actually see and feel and touch and taste the ocean which is on our doorstep. And there's not too many places anywhere along the Great Ocean Road that you can do that.
We went from fresh fish sales to we've got the fish and chip shop now, which supplies a good product. People love sitting up there on the veranda and enjoying the view.
I've wanted to put our fish on a plate, sold to the public. I want Apollo Bay to be the hub of the fishing industry. That's what I want. And that's what I've fiercely worked for the last 40 years.
I think it's been a valuable part of the community for a long, long time because we're locals. We live here.
I think the co-op has a really strong alliance of fishermen that seem to stick together, and that's what keeps the co-op running. That's basically what it is. It's the fishermen working for the fishermen.
Feels like the co-op belongs to the town and the town belongs to the co-op, sort of. There's a real sort of community spirit still in Apollo Bay.
So we will live now to see the next phase of what the co-op becomes. And that's going to look very different to what the co-op was, because that's just the nature of industry. It's changing all the time.
We're very passionate to maintain this co-op and keep it going for the next generations. We've got some young people coming on, and we love them to pick up the baton and run with it.
And I believe that's primarily because we've got passionate people here who have kept it going for a long time, have kept the flame alive, and have kept the place turning over.
I'm excited as all hell. I've got plenty of energy left.
To be part of the co-op, it's good. We're one of the last standing groups of cooperatives, so to be one of few, it's a good feeling.
Be part of this. Come on board. Let's have a crack, because here it is. This is your future too.
Founded in 1948, the Fishermen's Co-op is approaching 75 years of servicing the local fishing industry and marketing the catch. In the year leading up to the making of this film, the Co-op handled 38 different species of fish and seafood, all of which were landed in Apollo Bay. In the last year, the Co-op has traded 18 tonnes of southern rock lobster purchased from the local fishermen. Of that 18 tonnes, 8 tonnes were sold to Melbourne wholesale markets. That left an impressive 10 tonnes sold locally through our Pascoe Street and harbour shops. The Co-op provided 240,000 litres of fuel to the commercial fishing fleet, recreational vessels, harbour dredges and the emergency services. We also provided 40 tonnes of bait to the local lobster fishermen. Throughout the last year we have employed 52 people and produced approximately 175,000 delicious meals from the humble kitchen at the harbour. The Fishermen's Co-op is an organisation steeped in history. and we are enthusiastic to continue adding to our history year after year.